Hello, everyone. Yes, I am your token English speaker for the day. And no, I did not understand the introduction, but I'm sure that only lovely words were said to introduce me. It's an honor for me to be here. I can't say I've ever presented in such a gorgeous library before. But I am here on behalf of the PISA Research Development and Innovation team to provide an overview of some of the work we've been doing to improve accessibility of the PISA assessment for students with special education needs, with the hope that the work we are doing can be scaled up to the 2029 assessment. I assume that most, if not all, people in the audience know what PISA is, I see nods. But for those of you who don't know, it is an international assessment that is administered to 15-year-olds to assess their reading, math, and science ability. I have 10 minutes to give this talk, and I'm trying not to go over, but this is the agenda of the talk for today. I want to give an overview of the accessibility project, so how it started, what is our goal, and then I want to talk about some of the work we've done to develop and implement an accessible version of the PISA science assessment before talking about some of the lessons we've learned in the process and the challenges and issues that we'll have to consider for scaling up the assessment in 2029. So for some background, the PISA Research Development Innovation Team was launched in 2020 to introduce conceptual, methodological, and operational advancements in PISA. So the way we do this is we propose projects on a 2-year basis that are then reviewed by the PISA countries, and then they rank these projects. The highly ranked projects then become the priority of the RDI team. And the Improving Accessibility in PISA project was highly ranked within the last 2 cycles, and it will continue to be a priority, I'm very confident to say, to 2029 and beyond. But the goal of this project is to improve the representativity and fairness in PISA by enhancing accessibility of the test for students with special education needs. And since the inception of the project, we've worked with 7 partnering countries, and I want to highlight the work that the Swedish National Center has done. They have provided a lot of input and feedback throughout this entire process. So thank you very much. The need for this project kind of makes a little more sense when you think about the current state of accessibility in PISA. So PISA has pretty strict guidelines that prevent a lot of students with special education needs from participating. So if you look at the tables on the screen, they kind of outline some of the accommodations that are explicitly allowed and then explicitly not allowed in PISA. This was for 2022. That has not changed for the recent 2025 cycle. But generally what you'll notice is that students are not given access to the accommodations that they would typically receive in national or other standardized assessments. Something you should also know is that PISA does administer a shortened version of the assessment to address this issue for students with special education needs, but this shortened version also does not adequately address the needs of these students. So the insufficiency of this shortened form and the lack of accommodations for students has led to an increasing number of these students being excluded from PISA. So with this in mind, I do want to talk a little bit now about the work we tried to do to increase the accessibility of the science assessment. And to do this, we kind of had a 2-pronged approach. So the first thing we did was conduct a survey amongst the PISA countries and economies and a literature review to identify priority needs. So who are the students who are being frequently excluded from PISA but otherwise are receiving accommodations in other assessment contexts? And once we identify these accommodations, can we integrate them into an accessible form? We also conducted a literature review on accessible item design and revision principles in an attempt to revise some of the new science items we've developed as well for PISA 2025. This survey that we conducted to identify students with special education needs that were frequently excluded kind of yielded 3 categories of difficulties that we have decided are priorities to address for PISA 2029. So the first category of students are students with specific difficulties reading. So this includes students with dyslexia and other reading disabilities. Our second category includes students with moderate to severe difficulty seeing. And then our third category of students included students who have difficulty controlling their behavior and or focusing. So we have ADHD students included in this category. Based on the survey and some of our literature review, there were a couple accommodations that we identified as promising to include in this accessible form. These included the inclusion of breaks, the creation of a shorter assessment, a text-to-speech tool to help students read the items and answer questions, and visual tools and adjustments. So, for example, tools that allow students to zoom, change the contrast, and adjust the size and the type of font. And these, we say, are promising because there is some evidence in the literature to support their benefit for our targeted students with needs. But at the same time, the evidence in the current research literature is not conclusive. So there definitely needs to be more empirical research to assess the impact of including these accommodations for our students. I just want to also give a quick overview of some of the revisions we made to the science items. I apologize for the small print. I just talked about making font sizes bigger to make them more accessible. But this was an example of an old item. You'll notice that there's a lot of text here. Here are some of the revisions we made. Just to summarize, we highlighted some keywords in bold. We included some visuals, and we also kind of shortened the amount of text that are presented to students. We also made changes to the layout so that students would see the item responses after seeing all the stimulus. We had an opportunity in 2024 to implement this accessible form with the revised items and the accommodations with our 7 partnering countries. We had 260 students in total, and these include, of course, the students we have identified as priority needs in PISA. I do want to make a quick note that the combined group consisted mostly of students with both dyslexia and difficulties focusing or controlling their behavior, and then the other group included students with on the autism spectrum disorder and more general learning disabilities. In the platform, we were able to provide the following accommodations that I've talked about previously, but a text-to-speech tool, tools that allowed you to adjust the interface, so a zoom tool, a contrast adjustment tool, a tool that allowed you to change font type and size, increase spacing vertically, horizontally between words and letters, and then a tool that can help you change the size of the mouse pointer and the color. We also made the test a lot shorter. We only focused on administering the new items in the science assessment for 2025. So this was 33 items in total, and students were also given the opportunity to partake in fixed breaks or breaks on demand, and we allowed the administrators to make the decision. I'm going to just give a brief overview of the results. A lot of the things I've talked about have been published in working papers on our website with a lot more details. So if you're more interested in the details, please let me know and I'd be happy to share those resources. I'm also going to share some of the good stuff. I've saved some of the bad, challenging results for the roundtable after this, so if you're interested, please attend. But generally, a lot of students found the assessment engaging. Obviously, it depended on the targeted need. We did see lower engagement for students with attention and behavioral control difficulties. Students did say that the accessibility tools are easy to use and helpful. We were a little worried that just giving students access to all these tools would kind of make them distracted or they would just play around with them. We did not really see evidence of this, which was great. They also said that across the needs, the read aloud tool was the most helpful. And it was also the tool that was most frequently used, along with the contrast tool. As I just stated, we did see differences in tool use and perceived helpfulness of the tools across groups. So for students with reading difficulties, dyslexia, or moderate vision difficulties, they really appreciated the read aloud. And for students with difficulty seeing, obviously they used the visual adjustment tools on a higher frequency. Students did appreciate the possibility to take breaks, though most students did not take breaks. And they also stated that our attempts to revise the items to make them more accessible were very helpful and helped with the clarity and legibility. So that's some of the work we've done so far. We did try to implement this form in the 2025 main study. I have to leave some new stuff for the next presentation, so I will share on that. But I want to talk about some of kind of the challenges or issues that we are currently grappling with, and some of our kind of future directions and priority. But obviously, there's a lot of things you have to consider when we scale up implementation of this work, especially for the next assessment cycle. We need to think about developing a standardized identification system for students across PISA countries, economies, and educational systems. The way we define these students with special needs varies greatly. And as I note just below, I mean, there's so much heterogeneity within each of these groups, think dyslexia, and across these groups. So how do we go about doing that? That is something we're currently thinking about. We want to also think about the best way to implement this form in schools without putting too much additional burden on teachers and administrators. So we're also asking, are we able to implement this to students with special education needs in the same classroom as their peers? And then we also need to consider, well, how, once they take these assessments, will we actually use their scores? Will we report their scores separately, or will their scores be used in the scaling of students' overall performance? Something we also notice is the need to create more personalized assessments for these students. So how can we go about creating multiple forms or personalizing the accessibility tools to students based on their needs? And we've only worked on the science assessment so far, but I mean, reading is the focal domain for 2029, and we also want to create an accessible math assessment. So then we have to consider, well, are there differences in the tools that will be available across these different domains? How should they be used? There's a lot of questions surrounding whether the inclusion of these tools are providing accommodations or maybe modifying the construct of assessment. Specifically, the read aloud when it comes to the reading assessment. So these are questions that we're really thinking about. And will we include universal accommodations for students? So we're really thinking about all of these different issues, and we're hoping to address them for the 2029 assessment. Thank you.